Imagine walking into a grocery store, heading down the bread aisle, and being faced with an overwhelming variety of choices. Everything from soft white loaves to whole wheat, multigrain, and even gluten-free options. But behind all these labels lies a hidden truth. The vast majority of the bread on these shelves is ultra-processed. It's easy to assume that bread is still a simple food made from flour, water, yeast, and salt. But today's supermarket loaves are often packed with chemicals, preservatives, additives, and sugars that have turned one of the world's most ancient foods into something far removed from its original form. The story of how ultra-processed bread took over America is one of industrialization, convenience, and marketing, and it has profound implications for our health and culture. In the mid-20th century, bread in America was still made in small bakeries or at home, following the same basic recipes that had been used for centuries. But after World War II, as the country embraced mass production and industrial food systems, the bread industry underwent a massive transformation. With the rise of large-scale bakeries and new technologies, bread went from a fresh, perishable product to something that could sit on store shelves for weeks without going stale. This shift was driven by both the desire for convenience and the need to keep up with the growing population's demand for affordable food. However, to make this happen, manufacturers had to heavily process the ingredients, adding preservatives, emulsifiers, and other chemicals to extend the shelf life and maintain texture. As the years went on, ultra-processed bread became synonymous with convenience. For busy American families, grabbing a loaf of pre-sliced, ready-to-eat bread was a quick solution for meals. Sandwiches, toast, and other bread-based foods became dietary staples, and the ease of accessing such products at any time made it seem like a natural part of modern life. But with this convenience came compromises. The ultra-processed versions of bread were not only filled with additives, but also stripped of many of the natural nutrients found in whole grains. Processing techniques removed fiber, vitamins, and minerals, and in their place, manufacturers added synthetic versions of nutrients to enrich the bread. While this enrichment process helped meet basic nutritional requirements, it didn't replace the value of the original, less processed ingredients. The marketing of ultra-processed bread played a huge role in its widespread acceptance. In the 1960s and 1970s, bread companies began using slogans that emphasized softness, shelf life, and even health benefits, despite the lack of natural ingredients. Commercials and advertisements pushed the narrative that this type of bread was better than homemade or bakery-bought loaves. The message was clear: ultra-processed bread was modern, convenient, and even good for you. Brands like Wonder Bread became iconic, with bright packaging and promises of enriched vitamins, making their products seem like the perfect addition to every American household. Meanwhile, the focus was on making bread as soft and fluffy as possible, which required even more processing and additives. One of the most significant changes in how bread was made involved the fermentation process. Traditional bread making relied on slow fermentation, often with natural yeast like sourdough starters. This process not only contributed to the flavor and texture of the bread, but also made it easier to digest and provided beneficial nutrients. However, in the rush to mass-produce bread, this slow fermentation was replaced by the Chorleywood bread process, a method developed in the 1960s that used mechanical energy to speed up the dough's fermentation. This process allowed bread to be produced much faster, but it also required the addition of extra yeast, fats, and chemical improvers to achieve the same results. The outcome was a product that was far removed from traditional bread in both taste and nutritional value. As ultra-processed bread took over grocery store shelves, the health consequences became more apparent. For one, the refined flour used in these products was much higher on the glycemic index, meaning it caused blood sugar levels to spike more quickly than less processed grains. This contributed to the rise in diabetes, obesity, and other metabolic disorders in America. Additionally, many of the additives used in ultra-processed bread have raised concerns among health experts. Preservatives like calcium propionate, emulsifiers like mono and diglycerides, and artificial flavors and sweeteners have all been linked to various health issues, from digestive problems to inflammation. But despite these concerns, the dominance of ultra-processed bread continued to grow, largely due to the aggressive marketing campaigns and the sheer convenience of the product. In recent years, more people have become aware of the downsides of ultra-processed foods, including bread. Movements toward whole foods, organic ingredients, and artisan baking have gained momentum as consumers look for healthier alternatives. Yet, ultra-processed bread remains a staple in most American households, and the reasons for this go beyond just convenience. For many families, especially those living in food deserts or with limited incomes, ultra-processed bread is one of the few affordable and accessible options. The industrial food system has made this type of bread cheap to produce and distribute, so it's no surprise that it continues to dominate the market. The rise of ultra-processed bread in America also reflects a broader shift in how we think about food. Over the past few decades, there has been a move away from cooking and preparing meals from scratch toward relying on pre-packaged, ready-to-eat products. This shift has not only changed our relationship with food, but also had a negative impact on public health. Ultra-processed foods like bread are often calorie-dense but nutrient-poor, leading to a range of diet-related health issues. And yet, the convenience and affordability of these products make them hard to resist for many people. The challenge now is finding a balance between convenience and health, and recognizing the role that ultra-processed bread has played in shaping the modern American diet. Despite the growing awareness of the health risks associated with ultra-processed bread, many people are still unaware of just how prevalent it is. Walk into any grocery store, and you'll see aisles filled with products that may seem healthy, labeled with terms like whole grain or multigrain. But a closer look at the ingredient lists reveals that even many of these seemingly healthier options are still ultra-processed, filled with additives and preservatives to keep them soft and shelf-stable. The packaging may suggest that these breads are a better choice, but in reality they're often not much different from their white bread counterparts. This marketing tactic has allowed ultra-processed bread to maintain its hold on the American diet, even as people become more health-conscious. However, it's not all bad news. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in traditional bread-making methods. Artisan bakeries are popping up across the country, offering sourdough, whole grain, and other less processed varieties of bread. People are starting to value quality over quantity when it comes to their food, and bread is no exception. For some, this shift represents a return to a simpler, healthier way of eating, one that prioritizes real ingredients and craftsmanship over convenience and cost-cutting measures. This movement has been further fueled by a growing awareness of the impact that processed foods have on the environment, with many consumers looking for more sustainable options. Yet, despite this renewed interest in traditional bread, the ultra-processed variety continues to reign supreme in most American households. The reasons are complex, but they boil down to a combination of factors: cost, convenience, and ingrained habits. Ultra-processed bread is often seen as a necessary part of the modern diet, something that's too easy and cheap to give up. And for many people, especially those living in low-income communities, it's one of the few affordable options available. This highlights the larger issue of food inequality in America, where access to fresh, healthy food is often limited by geography and income level. So, what's next for bread in America? Will ultra-processed bread continue to dominate, Or will we see a larger shift toward healthier, less processed alternatives? It's hard to say. On the one hand, there's a growing movement toward better food choices, driven by health-conscious consumers and small independent bakers. On the other hand, the convenience, affordability, and sheer marketing power behind ultra-processed bread make it difficult for traditional bread to gain significant ground. For many, the solution may lie somewhere in between, finding ways to make healthier bread options more accessible and affordable while still meeting the demands of a busy, modern lifestyle. Ultimately, the story of how ultra-processed bread took over America is about more than just bread. It's about how our food system has evolved, how convenience has shaped our choices, and how marketing has influenced the way we eat. It's a story that reflects the larger issues facing the American diet, from the rise of processed foods to the growing health crises that have come as a result. And while it may be difficult to undo the decades of dominance that ultra-processed bread has enjoyed, there's hope that with more awareness and better options, we can begin to reclaim bread as the nutritious, simple food it once was. The dominance of ultra-processed bread in America didn't happen overnight. It's the result of a long series of changes in technology, food production, and consumer behavior that slowly but surely transformed how bread is made and consumed. Understanding how ultra-processed bread took over America requires a deep dive into the evolution of the bread-making process and the broader industrial food system. It's a story that touches on everything from agricultural practices to corporate power, and it reflects the larger shift toward processed foods in the American diet. At its core, bread has always been a simple food. For thousands of years, people made bread with just a few basic ingredients: flour, water, salt, and yeast, or natural leavening agents. This process was slow and labor-intensive, but it resulted in a nutritious, whole food that provided essential vitamins, minerals, and fiber. However, the Industrial Revolution of the 19th century changed the way food was produced, including bread. As factories and machines replaced traditional methods, food production became more efficient, but it also became more dependent on chemical additives and mechanical processes. Bread was one of the first foods to undergo this transformation. One of the key developments that led to the rise of ultra-processed bread was the advent of roller milling. This method, which became popular in the late 1800s, allowed manufacturers to produce flour more quickly and efficiently by separating the wheat kernel's components. The problem was that roller milling stripped the wheat of its bran and germ, leaving only the starchy endosperm. This refined flour had a longer shelf life and was easier to work with, but it was also much less nutritious than whole wheat flour. Roller milling was a crucial step in the shift from traditional, whole-grain bread to the ultra-processed bread we see today. As industrialization spread, so did the demand for cheap, convenient food. Bread, once baked fresh and consumed quickly, became a product that could be mass-produced, packaged, and sold in stores across the country. With the rise of commercial bakeries in the early 20th century, bread became one of the first truly national products in America. Companies like Wonder Bread capitalized on this new demand, producing soft, pre-sliced loaves that could be shipped long distances and last for weeks on store shelves. This was a revolutionary shift in how bread was made and consumed, and it set the stage for the rise of ultra-processed bread. The introduction of pre-sliced bread in the 1920s was another major milestone. Sliced bread was marketed as the epitome of modern convenience, and it quickly became a staple in American households. For busy families, sliced bread offered an easy way to make sandwiches and toast, and it eliminated the need to cut loaves by hand. However, this convenience came with a cost. To ensure that the bread stayed soft and fresh for longer periods, manufacturers began adding preservatives and other chemicals to the dough. These additives helped extend the bread's shelf life, but they also made the product more processed and less nutritious. As America entered the post-World War II era, the food industry began to embrace even more technological advancements. The 1950s and 1960s saw the rise of the processed food boom, with companies developing new methods to mass produce and distribute food. Ultra-processed bread was a natural fit for this new era of convenience foods. By this time, bread had become a highly industrialized product, and manufacturers were focused on maximizing profits and minimizing costs. This meant using cheaper ingredients, like refined flours and hydrogenated oils, and relying on chemical additives to maintain the bread's texture and appearance. The mass production of bread also changed how Americans thought about their food. No longer was bread a handmade, artisanal product. It was a commodity, something that could be bought cheaply and consumed quickly. Ultra-processed bread became a symbol of modernity and progress, and its rise was closely tied to the broader cultural shifts of the mid-20th century. People were working longer hours and spending less time cooking, and ultra-processed foods offered a quick and easy solution to the demands of modern life. Bread, in particular, was seen as a versatile food that could be used in a variety of meals, from sandwiches to snacks. As ultra-processed bread continued to dominate, it began to lose much of its original nutritional value. Traditional bread, made from whole grains, was a rich source of fiber, vitamins, and minerals. But ultra-processed bread, made from refined flour and loaded with additives, was far less nutritious. To make up for this loss, manufacturers started enriching their bread by adding synthetic vitamins and minerals back into the dough. This process of fortification allowed companies to market their products as healthy. By the 1970s and 1980s, ultra-processed bread was firmly entrenched in the American diet. It was cheap, widely available, and aggressively marketed. Major bread companies spent millions on advertising campaigns that promoted their products as wholesome and nutritious, even though they were packed with artificial ingredients. This marketing strategy was highly effective, and it helped cement the place of ultra-processed bread in American households. Brands like Wonder Bread became household names, and their brightly colored packaging and catchy slogans made them synonymous with American life. However, as ultra-processed bread became more common, so did concerns about its impact on health. By the 1990s, public awareness of the health risks associated with processed foods was growing. Research began to show that diets high in refined grains and processed foods were linked to an increased risk of chronic diseases like diabetes, obesity, and heart disease. Ultra-processed bread, with its high glycemic index and lack of nutrients, was contributing to these problems. But despite these concerns, ultra-processed bread remained a dominant force in the food industry. The 21st century has seen a growing backlash against ultra-processed foods, including bread. Consumers are becoming more educated about the ingredients in their food, and there is a renewed interest in traditional, whole foods. This has led to the rise of artisan bread and the resurgence of interest in home baking. Many people are now turning to sourdough, whole grain, and organic bread as healthier alternatives to the ultra-processed varieties that have dominated for so long. Small independent bakeries are flourishing, and more people are learning the art of bread making at home. Despite these trends, ultra-processed bread still holds a significant share of the market. The convenience, affordability, and long shelf life of these products make them appealing to many consumers. For families on a budget or those living in areas with limited access to fresh food, ultra-processed bread remains one of the few affordable options. This is part of the broader issue of food inequality in America, where access to healthy, whole foods is often determined by geography and income level. For many people, the choice to buy ultra-processed bread is not just about convenience, it's about necessity. The rise of ultra-processed bread also highlights the powerful role that corporations play in shaping the American diet. Major food companies have enormous influence over what we eat, and their marketing strategies are designed to keep us hooked on processed foods. These companies have spent decades perfecting their formulas, using additives and chemicals to make their products as appealing and addictive as possible. Ultra-processed bread, with its soft texture, mild flavor, and long shelf life, is a product of this industrial food system. It's designed to be cheap, convenient, and irresistible, and it's worked. In recent years, more attention has been paid to the environmental impact of ultra-processed foods, including bread. The mass production of bread requires large amounts of energy, water, and resources, and the use of chemical additives and preservatives can contribute to environmental pollution. Traditional bread making, on the other hand, is a more sustainable process that relies on fewer resources and produces less waste. As consumers become more aware of the environmental consequences of their food choices, there is growing interest in sustainable, less processed options. But for now, ultra-processed bread continues to be a staple in American households. The reasons for this are complex, but they reflect broader societal trends. As people continue to lead busy lives, convenience remains a top priority, and ultra-processed bread offers an easy solution. It's cheap, widely available, and requires no preparation. For many, it's a necessary part of their daily routine. And while there is growing interest in healthier, less processed alternatives, the dominance of ultra-processed bread is unlikely to wane anytime soon. The story of how ultra-processed bread took over America is one that mirrors the rise of processed foods in general. It's a tale of industrialization, convenience, and corporate power, and it reflects the changing relationship between Americans and their food. Ultra-processed bread is a product of its time, born out of the desire for efficiency and mass production, but also a reflection of the broader cultural shifts that have transformed the American diet. While the future of bread in America may be uncertain, one thing is clear. Ultra-processed bread has left an indelible mark on the way we eat. In the end, whether or not we continue to rely on ultra-processed bread will depend on a variety of factors. As awareness of the health risks associated with processed foods grows, more people may turn to healthier alternatives.